Hello there, welcome to another special edition of African Football Archives, and today we are looking at Zambia's success at the 2012 African Cup of Nations. Please don't forget to subscribe, like and share this video. 10 years ago, the 2012 African Cup of Nations threw up one of the biggest surprises in international footballing history when Zambia, 10th favorite at 4-1 before the competition started, shocked favorites Ivory Coast and others by winning the final in Libreville via a penalty shootout. It was the culmination of a heady 3-week adventure that made no sense analytically, but complete sense from a storyline point of view. In April 1993, most of the incredibly promising Zambian national squad, their eyes on a place at the 1994 World Cup spot and victory at the 1994 African Cup of Nations, were killed when the military plane transporting them to a World Cup qualifier in Senegal crashed into the sea shortly after taking off from a refuelling stop in Gabon. Although a rebuilt team based around star striker Kalusha Bwalia, who had avoided the 1993 disaster due to the fact that he was a PSV Eindhoven player while traveling to Senegal from Netherlands, finished as runners-up to Nigeria at the 1994 African Cup of Nations, and Zambia never made it to the 1994 World Cup and are still waiting to appear at one. By 2012, Zambia had slipped back firmly into the second tier of African footballing powers, often capable of getting through the group stages in many editions of the African Cup of Nations, but usually dispatched by one of the continent's big boys, invariably due to a lack of goal-scoring threat. In 2010, Zambia made it past the group stage in first place ahead of Cameroon, Gabon and Tunisia, but they went out on penalties in the quarterfinals after a 0-0 draw against Nigeria. Disappointment once again. On to 2012 then, and try again. The 2012 African Cup of Nations was full of players who had graced the club scene in Europe for much of the previous decade and would do so in the future, from Kolo Toure to Didier Drogba, from a 22-year-old Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang to a 22-year-old Andre Ayew. Zambia's squad, in contrast, had 5 players who played domestically, 8 from the South African top flight, as well as 5 from the 2009 CAF Champions League winners TP Mazembe from the Democratic Republic of Congo. The only European-based player in the squad was 21-year-old striker Emmanuel Mayuka. He was about to go on to big things, but no one in January 2012 saw it coming. Zambia were assigned to Group A along with Senegal, Libya and tournament co-host Equatorial Guinea. Senegal, the darlings of the 2002 World Cup, were third favorite for the African Cup of Nations, but a 2-1 loss to Zambia in the opening match saw them spiral to 3 defeats from 3. A 2-2 draw with Libya hinted that perhaps this time around goal scoring would not be an issue, if sometimes had been for Zambia in previous tournaments. That left a showdown in the final group game against Equatorial Guinea on their home turf. A win or a draw would see the hosts finish top of the group, but instead a 1-0 loss saw Chipolopolo progress to play Group B runners-up Sudan in the quarterfinals, with Equatorial Guinea forced to go head-to-head with Ivory Coast, who had 3 wins from 3 and hadn't conceded a goal. Zambian manager Hervé Renard was playing it simple, quite literally. His team was set up in a 4-4-2 formation for 5 of their 6 matches at the tournament, opting for a 4-2-3-1 for the Libya draw. That game was notable even to casual observers as particularly a brutal encounter. The ball was in play for only 44 minutes and 48 seconds, while Zambia completed only 53% of their passes. Libya's pass completion against Zambia was 58% compared to 73% and 83.6% in their other matches. Renard had found a way for Zambia to compete, and they were proving very good at it. 26 of their 42 shots in the group stage were from outside the box. Hitting the channel and shooting from distance was not the way football was about to pivot in the 2010s, but when it works, go. As flagged earlier, by winning the group, Zambia got to face Sudan in the quarterfinals, and it was the most comfortable game of their tournament. Not only did they cruise to a 3-0 win, but Sudan had only 5 shots in their entire game, while Zambia had 9 on target and completed 79.8% of their passes. While the Zambian players celebrated a famous win, Ivory Coast eased past Equatorial Guinea 3-0 on the same evening, Didier Drogba scoring the ante-penultimate and the penultimate African Cup of Nations of his career. Zambia had dodged their way into the semi-final superbly, but there was no way of avoiding the big boys. It was Ghana next, and then the winners of Mali against Ivory Coast in the final. Ghana had been continental champions in 1963, 1965, 1978 and 1982. A third-place finish in 2008 and a second-place finish in 2010, along with coming so close of reaching the 2010 World Cup semi-finals later that year, led many to assume the top prize was coming their way in 2012, but the Zambia narrative bent wagon just couldn't be stopped. In an absolute name-on-the-trophy display, Zambia faced 18 shots in the semi-final, including a wasted first-half penalty from Asamoah Gyan, while generating just 8 themselves, 6 of them from long range. But amid a man-of-the-match performance by goalkeeper Kennedy Mwene, the keeper of the tournament for 2012, an actual goal scorer at the 2013 African Cup of Nations, Zambia sucker punched Ghana with 12 minutes to go thanks to Emmanuel Mayuka, one of 7 players to score 3 goals in the 2012 tournament, including Drogba and Aubameyang, but the winner of the Golden Boot. Such antics earned him a $3 million move to Southampton, but failed to score with the English coastal side and the Premier League, and would have to wait until 2020 for its first Zambian goal via Leicester City's Patson Daka. The semi-final was a battle, and Zambia embraced that battle. Their reward was a place in the final. There was no avoiding the fact that Ivory Coast were huge favorites for the 2012 African Cup of Nations. Their golden generation were due the title. It had been 20 years since they had last been African champions. They hadn't even considered a goal in this edition, and to be fair, nor would they do so in the final. The continent's best defense against the hyper-practical Zambians. 0-0 was predicted by many ahead of the game in Libreville, less than a kilometer from the sea that tragically claimed the Zambian squad in 1993, and so it proved. The Ivorians correctly shackled Rainford Calabar, who had created at least 2 chances in each of their previous 5 games, but was restricted to only 1 in 120 minutes in the final. The match was so restrained that Zambia were able to record their second highest pass completion of the tournament at 76.1%. There were 33 shots in the match, but only 7 of them were on target. The most famous shot in the game was definitely not on target, as Drogba's penalty was blazed over. Drogba would make amends of sorts in the inevitable shootout, and personally later in that year with Chelsea in the Champions League final, where he scored the winning spot kick. But there was no solace to Ivory Coast fans in February 2012. In sudden death, Zambia didn't take advantage of a colossal miss, but when Gervinho failed to score at 7-7, defender Stopila Sunzu did what defenders do and hammered it down the middle. Zambia were continental champions for the first time. Nothing would bring back the 1993 team back, but their memory had at last been honored. Ivory Coast's response to this shock of shocks: if you can't beat them, join them. In 2014, they appointed Hervé Renard and his collection of dress shirts as their manager, and a year later he won the competition for them too, the first manager to lead 2 different countries to the African Cup of Nations success. The Chipolopolo might have had better teams in the past and may well do so in the future, but the 2012 side pulled off one of the greatest continental coups and will rightly be cherished and celebrated for as long as football is played. That's all for this edition of African Football Archives, and if you have anything that you want to share about Zambia's 2012 African Cup of Nations success, please do so in the comment section below. Please don't forget to subscribe, like and share this video. Till next time, it's bye-bye.